Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker, and welcome to a special live stream, the first of its kind. I've decided to do a live stream rebuttal to Governing Body Update number 4, 2021. And I guess I should just explain what this is all about. What is a Governing Body Update? I appreciate not all of you follow jw.org like a hawk, like myself and others. But basically, around the time that the pandemic began, Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Jehovah's Witness leadership, otherwise known as the governing body, decided to use their JW broadcasting studio to issue kind of news programs, news bulletins, covering the way the organization was responding to the coronavirus pandemic. And they'd sort of done stuff like that before. It just wasn't kind of a routine thing. It was like a very one-off thing. For example, they did something about Russia. Every now and then, if there was some kind of calamity or disaster, they would put out a show. Now they're doing it quite regularly, and they're calling them governing body updates. They're doing it by year, or numbering them by year. So the one we're going to be looking at today is 2021 Governing Body Update number 4, hosted by Mark Sanderson. The previous one was number 3, hosted by Tony Morris. You might be asking, Lloyd, why haven't you done these before? You know, why haven't you included these in your rebuttals? I guess because when I do a rebuttal, I like to do it justice, especially when I feel as though these are shows or this is video material that millions of Jehovah's Witnesses are likely to watch. That's not really how I view the updates. I view the updates, or for a while I viewed the updates as sort of a gimmick, something that they do infrequently and perhaps haven't been, you know, very interesting. But now they're doing them more routinely, and I realize that with the live streaming software that I'm using, I'm now able to actually show videos, whereas I wasn't able to do that previously on the StreamYard platform. Now StreamYard allows me to actually show videos, and we've already done a couple of shows, myself and Mark O'Donnell, where we've taken a look at videos. And I thought, well, this is perfect for answering the governing body updates that get put out periodically. We have one for, let me think, they put it out, I'm going to say a week or so ago, hosted by Mark Sanderson. Again, an update really on the coronavirus pandemic, but weaving in this routinely kind of reoccurring theme of, hey, we're being persecuted, look at what's happening in Russia, etc., etc. So I figured, why not do this? Why not cover this? And, you know, live streaming, although live streaming probably isn't ideal for my other rebuttals, such as the JW broadcasting, which are longer, I'm dealing with, you know, material that's usually a bit more complicated, you know, theologically speaking. There's nothing stopping me from using the StreamYard platform and live streaming to cover these little news bulletin thingies. So that's the preamble out of the way. I do also want to mention that I'm going to be experimenting on this particular live stream, and I'm going to be doing something I've never done on a live stream before, but there's a first time for everything, and I'm interested to know how this goes. I am going to have, or I'm going to allow, a viewer invasion. So at the opportune time, producer Bob, who is lurking in the background and helping me with finding the comments and highlighting highlighting various comments and super chats, producer Bob in the live chat is going to release a link to this StreamYard live stream. And if you click on the link, it will basically put you in what I like to call the green room. So I will be able to see you, and I will be able to summon you onto the screen. Now, the only caveat, because I've given this some thought, the only caveat is, if you're interested in doing this, first of all, be aware that I'm not going to have time, possibly, for everyone that is interested in appearing. So please don't be offended if for whatever reason we don't get round to you. Second of all, please have your camera on. And I realise some of you can't have your camera on. And you have to understand that there's logic behind this. First of all, I don't want to, I want to make it as difficult as possible for people to troll me. And I realise that that generally trolls tend to be cowards and they don't like people to see what they look like. So this is more of a measure against trolls than a measure against PMOs and faders, which I obviously have nothing against. And all I would say is if you're feeling put out as a PMO or as a fader, I do have the voicemails available to you. So if you watch a voicemail video, that will tell you. In fact, I'll tell you now, it's speakpipe.com/Cedars is the address if you'd like to leave a voicemail on any topic. And I try and include as many of those voicemails as possible. So have your camera on. And also, obviously, be respectful and on topic. So I'd appreciate if your comment or question is related to the material that's been considered, because, you know, that makes sense because everyone's tuning in, presumably, to think about and discuss this particular topic. So that's really the only rules. And I'm fascinated to see how that goes later. But anyway, all of that preamble aside, let's look at the bloody video, shall we? So, here we go.
At Romans chapter...
Oh, hang on there, Mark Sanderson. So, again, Mark Sanderson is taking us through this, and I will be pausing him periodically to share a piece of my mind. Now you can proceed, Mark.
At Romans chapter 8 and verse 35, the Apostle Paul asked, "Who will separate us from the love of the Christ? Will tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or hunger, or nakedness, or danger, or sword?" Notice how Paul answered that question in verse 37. On the contrary, in all these things, we are coming off completely victorious through the one who loved us. That's a very fitting scripture for this update. Many of the things Paul mentioned, we've experienced in the past year. There have been many challenges, yet through the help we receive from Jehovah, we are coming off victorious.
So he's not just talking about the pandemic here. As we're going to see, he's going to link in that element of Romans 8:35 and 37, which talks about persecution. So this is kind of a persecution and pandemic double whammy that we're going to receive over the next 16 minutes or so. So he is going to link in Russia, etc. But I would suggest mostly, you know, this is about the pandemic. And indeed, as I've already mentioned, most of these update videos are to do with the pandemic. And the biggest problem that routinely surfaces in these update videos is this reoccurring kind of implication that the only way you're going to get through a disaster, and specifically a pandemic, is if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's kind of the elephant in the room, really. Well, it's not even an elephant in the room. It's just there all the time. They're continually suggesting that there's no way in the world you'd make it through the pandemic unless you were doing it their way and following their direction, which is obviously deeply flawed reasoning.
Of course, we're all contending with the pandemic. Jehovah's organization has been complying with guidance from public health officials worldwide. We've worked hard as an organization to show deep respect for the sanctity of life. And we've watched Jehovah bless these efforts as our meetings and ministry have thrived.
So he said three things there. First of all, he says that they're complying with the authorities. Well, isn't it interesting that they comply with the authorities when it's a pandemic that threatens the leadership? Let's face it, the governing body are mostly the demographic most at risk from this particular pandemic. And when it's something that threatens them, suddenly, oh, okay, we're going to comply with what the authorities say. We're not going to comply with what the authorities say when it comes to child safeguarding. We're going to decide for ourselves, thank you, how we deal with that, because we're a religion and we know better. But when it comes to something that threatens them directly, all of a sudden it's, oh, of course we're going to comply. Second of all, he mentions that Jehovah's Witnesses have deepest respect for the sanctity of life. Well, that's dubious, given their policy of persuading people to refuse blood transfusions, even if it means their death. And what did he say as well? I've forgotten the third point.
For the sanctity of life.
Yeah, that was that part.
And we've watched Jehovah bless these efforts as our meetings and ministry have thrived.
The meetings and ministry have thrived. Well, that's kind of suitably vague, isn't it? In what way have they thrived? In what way has the ministry thrived if in 2020 we saw an overall reduction in the number of Jehovah's Witness publishers? That doesn't speak to me to be a ministry that is thriving if you count as thriving it being successful and people joining the religion. As to meetings thriving, well, there's a very simple explanation for that, as I've mentioned in my videos. Now that the organization is, at least temporarily, maybe even longer, effectively a Zoom cult, there's no way for witnesses to escape going to the meeting. I mean, what's your excuse? What's your excuse for missing a meeting if all you need to do to attend one is switch on your tablet or switch on your smartphone? You do not have an excuse anymore as a Jehovah's Witness. And the organization is capitalizing on this, effectively exploiting the pandemic to increase its control over members.
However, we are not immune to the effects of the virus. As of May 15, we have now lost over 17,000 of our dear brothers and sisters to COVID-19. No doubt most of us have lost someone we love. How comforting to know that our loved ones are safe in Jehovah's memory. Even death has not separated them from Jehovah.
So we have this statistic now of 17,000 Jehovah's Witnesses as of, was it May 15th? Certainly May 2021. 17,000 Jehovah's Witnesses have succumbed, sadly, to the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, that's a deeply sad thing. But as we're going to see in this update, everything is centered around the organization and the welfare of just Jehovah's Witnesses. There's no concern or interest in the wider population of our planet, in non-Jehovah's Witnesses. When you think about it, why would there be? Because Jehovah's Witnesses believe that all non-believers deserve to die imminently at Armageddon. So it sort of makes sense that it is completely JW-centric and they're not really interested in the wider picture. It still must be recognized that 17,000 Jehovah's Witnesses is a lot. It could be argued, I'm just trying to find the stats. I don't know whether anyone has any percentages. Producer Bob, do you have anything? I hate to land that on you, but if we can kind of drill down here, I'm interested to know whether this is kind of a higher than ordinary percentage. I know when I was first watching this, I'm trying to find the actual tweets because I did some very rudimentary mathematics on this. I can't find the tweet, you know. Just bear with me, folks. Because there are 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm intrigued to know. Here we are. Yeah, I didn't actually put the statistic there, unfortunately. But I'm just interested to know whether that's a higher than ordinary percentage or not. I would suspect it's probably slightly higher for two reasons. First of all, the demographic of Jehovah's Witnesses, I would suggest, is aging. I would suggest that, young people generally, the beliefs aren't sticking with young people, and this will mean that on average, Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't have the stats to back this up, but I would guess that Jehovah's Witnesses on average are getting older. That's not going to be good in terms of the pandemic. And also, Jehovah's Witnesses are growing in parts of the world that have managed the pandemic poorly. So Brazil is a huge country for Jehovah's Witness growth. Brazil has dealt with the pandemic abominably, just terribly. So yeah, it's very, very sad that the numbers are so high for Jehovah's Witness deaths, and you have to wonder what the reasons are. Maybe we'll find out at some point, maybe we won't. But it is, again, very geared towards caring only about members and believers rather than thinking about the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, I should mention, is that as of today, we're looking at 3.7 million deaths around the world. This is a deadly pandemic. And I think it's a bit tone deaf to be focusing purely on one religion.
There have been many recent news reports about the pandemic in India and Brazil. Many of you have been asking how our brothers there are doing. In the past month, in India, there have been 10 times as many new cases and deaths among the brothers than there were in the previous month. The disaster relief committees are actively monitoring the needs of our brothers and, as needed, helping them locate hospitals that have available beds. In Brazil, the number of cases and the number of deaths continue to be high. Sadly, over 400 of our brothers in Brazil have died from the virus in just the past month. The responsible brothers are working hard to help our brothers in these lands. Please keep all of our brothers in India and Brazil in your prayers.
I mean, I suppose you could argue, look, this is a Jehovah's Witness video intended for Jehovah's Witnesses. Of course, they're going to focus on Jehovah's Witnesses. But again, I'm just not picking up any sort of sensitivity to what's happening to outsiders. I mean, in India and in Brazil, it's just been a total catastrophe. If I look at the numbers for Brazil, we're so far looking at 468,000 deaths in that country. And if I bring up the numbers for India, which you can do very easily, by the way, if you type in COVID deaths, Google will take you straight to the relevant page. 338,000 deaths so far in India. Is it too much to ask for some kind of acknowledgement of what's happening outside of the Jehovah's Witness bubble? And doesn't it sort of speak to this kind of doomsday attitude of, well, they're doomed anyway. They're going to die at Armageddon anyway, so maybe Jehovah's doing them a favor. Maybe it's good that they get to die this way and not by being on the wrong end of a fireball. I don't know. I just feel it's a little bit tone deaf.
In various parts of the world, the virus is resurging, in some cases because of new variants. Clearly, this pandemic is not over. Please continue to be careful. You may find it helpful to review the 2020 Governing Body Update number 9, which explains how COVID-19 spreads and what we can do to protect ourselves.
So Mark Sanderson and the rest of the governing body are very interested in feeling and sounding and looking as though they're in control, and making Jehovah's Witnesses feel as though the only way they can survive this pandemic is by following their advice and their wisdom. You know, you're not going to find anywhere else. Don't even think about looking anywhere else for advice. We've got all the answers. We've got the videos. We've got the whiteboard animations, or whatever it is. We're your one-stop shop for advice on the COVID pandemic. So you don't need to go anywhere else. And for me, this again is kind of exploiting a disaster, a pandemic, as an opportunity to leverage control over 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, it turns out you can survive a pandemic, or you can cope in a pandemic, or act responsibly in a pandemic, because acting responsibly in a pandemic, of course, is no guarantee that you're going to survive. All it takes is to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and no matter how careful you are, this is the sort of pandemic that will get you. But it's just incredibly arrogant to infer that the way to survive a pandemic is to be a Jehovah's Witness and keep up to date with Jehovah's Witness propaganda, when that is manifestly not the case.
What is our view on vaccination? Jehovah's Witnesses are not against vaccination. We view it as a personal decision for each Christian to make. Already, in cooperation with public health officials, many in our Bethel families have chosen to be vaccinated.
Isn't that interesting? So there's some interesting language that's kind of seeping through here, which for me speaks to like an underlying desire for control. They're talking, he first of all says, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses are not against vaccination, meaning Jehovah's Witnesses currently are not dissuaded from accepting vaccines. That hasn't always been the case, by the way, which I'm going to come to. He also says that it's a personal decision. Well, technically speaking, they use the same language when it comes to blood transfusions. Oh, blood transfusions are a personal decision. We're just going to disassociate you if you willfully and unrepentantly have one, but it's a personal decision. So whether it's a personal decision or not is frankly irrelevant in that context. It just seems to me to be a bit creepy. I think it's very telling and kind of a red flag that Jehovah's Witnesses even need to be told this, if you think about it. It should be superfluous information, redundant information. Why should Mark Sanderson be telling Jehovah's Witnesses that they are allowed to be vaccinated? That should be just obvious, shouldn't it? You only need this sort of information in a cult that does impose itself on people's medical decisions. So it's really quite telling. And as for Jehovah's Witnesses are not against vaccines, which he just said earlier, well, that's not always been the case. And I would encourage viewers, if you haven't already checked this website out, I would recommend quotes-watchtower.co.uk. It's quite a dated website, but it is a treasure trove of cringeworthy quotes. And I have checked many of them, by the way, because I've used this website a few times for research. And every time I've checked these quotes in my own collection where I've been able to, they've been accurate. Let me read one or two quotes about vaccination. Golden Age, 1921, October 12th, page 17. Vaccination never prevented anything and never will, and is the most barbarous practice. Use your rights as American citizens to forever abolish the devilish practice of vaccination. So that was a 1921 Golden Age. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. Thinking people, this is the Golden Age of 1929, May 1st, page 502. Thinking people would rather have smallpox than vaccination because the latter sows the seeds of syphilis, cancers, eczema, erysipelas, scrofula, they're just making up words at this point, consumption, even leprosy, and many other loathsome affections. Hence, the practice of vaccination is a crime, an outrage, and a delusion. So that's the golden age of 1929, May 1st. I'll give you one. There are many, many such quotes, but I'll give you one or two more. November 13th, 1929, golden age, pages 106, 107. Avoid serum inoculations and vaccinations as they pollute the bloodstreams with their filthy pus. Scrolling down, some of these are a little bit too on the nose, to be honest, for YouTube. I should just mention, if you're reviewing this as a YouTube reviewer, I don't agree with this. I'm just explaining that Jehovah's Witnesses haven't always been in favor of vaccinations. Vaccination, according to the Consolation, May 31st, 1939, page 3, vaccination is a cruel hoax on mankind by Satan himself. Incidentally, it seems they didn't start to do a turnaround on vaccines until as late as the 60s. And then it was kind of begrudging. So November 1st, 1961, page 670, Watchtower, which means you can check it yourself on Watchtower Online Library. Vaccination is a virtually unavoidable practice in many segments of modern society, and the Christian may find some comfort under the circumstances in the fact that the use is not in actuality a feeding or nourishing process, which was specifically forbidden when man was told not to eat blood. I think that you'll have to check the quote itself, because it seems that it's been inadequately quoted here. But it is a contamination of the human system. So as late as the 1960s, they were saying it's still undesirable, it's a contamination, but what can we really do to stop vaccinations? That has been the attitude, viewers, of this organization towards vaccination. And I'm glad, I'm obviously delighted as someone with Jehovah's Witness family members that that's no longer the case. I just wish there was a bit more transparency. Is that too much to ask for them to say? And in a way, the fact that historically they have had negative things to say about vaccines makes transparency even more important when they're now counting on vaccines and counting on modern medicine to keep their members alive. And this, by the way, is routinely, it's a frustrating anomaly in the whole approach that the organization is taking to coronavirus. Everything's about faith in God. Everything's about showing loyalty. Read our articles, go to our meetings, etc., etc. That's the way of weathering the pandemic. It's never about heeding the advice of the WHO and taking vaccines, getting those vaccines when they're available. And ultimately, it is medical science, isn't it, that's going to bring an end to this pandemic, we would hope.
In 2020, we also faced an unprecedented number of natural disasters. Now, can you imagine? In the 2020 service year, we had 204 disasters. That's more than double the number of disasters that we had in 2018. Of course, we've had to cope with many disasters during the pandemic. Let me remind you of some of them. Central America was struck by Hurricane Eta. St. Vincent has had volcanic eruptions. Croatia was shaken by earthquakes.
I remember that one.
Lebanon was devastated by an explosion. Nigeria suffered widespread flooding. Mozambique was hit by Cyclone Eloise. The Philippines was pummeled by Super Typhoon Goni. Australia had destructive bushfires. These are just a few of the disasters we have faced during the pandemic. This is exactly what Paul was talking about when he mentioned tribulation, distress, hunger, nakedness, danger, or sword.
So apparently there's been an unprecedented number of natural disasters. And he's not just saying this as like a throwaway remark. He's clearly playing on the indoctrination of Jehovah's Witnesses, who have been indoctrinated over many years to think that natural disasters and calamities are going to get worse and worse and worse the nearer we get to Armageddon. He doesn't say that explicitly here. He just kind of uses that language. He knows what buttons to press. I would want to know, though, how, when he says unprecedented, does he mean what? In recorded history? In all time? He doesn't give any kind of stats or any means of us kind of affirming this. I would suggest that needs fact-checking. And I don't feel like I need to fact-check it. I just think it's kind of an extraordinary claim. And even if it were true that there has been an unprecedented number of natural disasters in 2020, that could be, for example, due to climate change. In fact, many of those things that were cited there, such as flooding and typhoons and hurricanes, do seem climate change related, and we have a scientific explanation for all of those things. When it comes to earthquakes, I think Paul Grundy did a really good article on jwfacts.com, because this was actually one of the things that caused him to wake up when he did research on this specific claim. Jehovah's Witnesses say, oh, earthquakes have been on the rise since 1914. That's one of the ways that we know that we're in the last days. And obviously, I have some experience with earthquakes, living as I do in Croatia and being on the wrong end of a 6 magnitude earthquake back in December. But it turns out that there's nothing extraordinary. When you look at the actual numbers, there's nothing extraordinary about the frequency of earthquakes. Obviously, we're better at detecting them nowadays. We have modern scientific equipment, but there's nothing to suggest that there has been this huge spike in earthquakes since 1914. We live on a planet with a moving crust. It would be weird if we didn't have earthquakes. You know, they are part of the functioning of our planet. So I just wish that they could do this without using it as an opportunity to put their narrative through. Again, they may not be doing it overtly, but Mark Sanderson's, use of words and everything for me seems very deliberate.
Would any of these things be able to separate us from God's love? What have we seen? Let's hear some expressions from our brothers in the United States.
When you have a disaster on top of a disaster, COVID-19 on top of Hurricane Sally, it's a challenge to get through and navigate both.
Being homebound for so many months, everybody was already feeling a little bit on edge. Then you had the stress of the flood on top of it.
The speed of the brothers and sisters responding was probably the most heartwarming. We called them on a Wednesday to start some of their work on Friday. And by Friday, they were organized and ready to go.
I think it's one of the most heartwarming privileges I've ever had to see how that Jehovah's organization can take care of needs, whereas the world around us is falling apart.
People, we think, I can handle this, I can handle this, I can do this. And you can't do it on your own. You need the friends, you need them.
When the call goes out, Jehovah's people come running. It's an amazing thing to see. There's no way that Jehovah's love can be blocked. If you're sheltered in place or wherever you are, Jehovah's love gets through.
There's no way that Jehovah's love can be blocked, that Jehovah's conditional love can be blocked. It can be very, very easily and quickly blocked if you stop believing. or if you smoke a cigarette, or if you get into a sexual relationship with a consenting adult outside of marriage, then you'll find that Jehovah's love is very, very quickly blocked. But provided you toe the line and do everything that's expected of you, you can have Jehovah's conditional love when there is a disaster. And I have actually seen this for myself, because following the earthquakes here in Croatia, I've already mentioned in my Shunagram video about how there were witnesses calling round to speak to, they actually tracked us down. We weren't even at this house. You know, this is the house, this is the building we were in when the earthquake struck, and because it's close to the epicenter, it got badly shaken. We fled to Istria, which is closer towards Italy, and we got tracked down by Jehovah's Witnesses, and they came and gave us a Shunagram. So I've seen this love for myself, the way they show up and kind of block you out. Oh yeah, not really here for you. Don't want to acknowledge your existence either, if you don't mind. I'm here for these two loyal brothers and sisters. So we had that. We also had a team of witnesses call round. Actually, Tibor and I were in the bunker, and we got warned not to go outside because we were basically, our house was being circled by Jehovah's Witnesses, who were, I think, part of the local, I'm going to say LDC, you know, the local construction group. And they were circling our house to inspect it post-earthquake to see if there was any damage that they could assist with. And that was kind of weird, because if there had been damage, they didn't find any damage. If they had been damage, they would then have been in the position where they would have had to expend resources potentially fixing the home and indeed the studio of an apostate. So I can only imagine they were quite relieved to find that there was no damage that needed to be fixed. But my point in telling you all of this is that it's all completely, as we've seen indeed in this segment, it's all completely oriented towards, let's help our own. Let's help fellow believers. Let's help Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's sort of pretend that no one else is affected here. And how is there anything extraordinary in that? I've quoted the scripture on my channel before. There's that verse where Jesus says, if you show love to those who are your own, what extraordinary thing are you doing? It might not be Jesus, it might be Paul who said that. What extraordinary thing are you doing if you're only interested in looking out for those who are your own? If those witnesses who were circling our house had knocked on the bunker door and said, "Are you Lloyd Evans?" And I'd said, "Yes." And they'd said, "We know you're no longer a believer. We know that you have left Jehovah's organization, but there's been a 6 magnitude earthquake. You know, there's been a situation in which you and your family had their lives in danger, and we want to know whether you're okay. You know, on a human level, aside from our religious differences, we're here to reassure ourselves that everything's okay." I would have been floored. It wouldn't have made me come running back to the organization, and I might have used the opportunity to, you know, try and, you know, get a conversation on other issues such as the child safeguarding and that kind of thing. But it would have been a hugely unexpected thing. But of course they were never going to do that, were they? Because I don't exist until I accept the authority of Mark Sanderson and his buddies. That's the way it works. It's completely conditional love. And as I said, how is that anything extraordinary? How is it anything to boast about?
We've been through a difficult situation, but our confidence is solid that He'll continue to help us. He got us through this problem. He'll get us through the next.
One of the reasons why our brothers are coming off victorious is because of all of you. You've been there to help. Some of you have risked your own safety to provide relief. Although most of us don't have the circumstances to do that, we've made donations.
There we go.
As a result, we've been able to provide our brothers with food, water, building materials, and medicine, all because of your generosity and goodness. Thank you for what you've done to help our brothers who face these disasters.
Never miss a good opportunity to remind Jehovah's Witnesses of the need to donate. Donate towards a work that's purely oriented towards helping those who are your own, helping fellow believers. And I also find it kind of creepy and distasteful that they give Jehovah's Witnesses this feeling of dependency, don't they? As if to say, same as with the coronavirus, your only way of dealing with this is really through us. We're your only ticket in town, really, to deal with a catastrophe, to deal with a disaster. So we need the money to deal with this. Well, what about everyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness? How do they cope? How do they get by? In the case of the earthquake, it was kind of weird because, well, there were lots of humanitarian agencies, and I covered some of them in my Return to the Bunker video, who were providing help. They were providing help irrespective of what people's religious backgrounds were. And that straight away is head and shoulders above what Jehovah's Witnesses are doing. But I don't know, I just find it distasteful that they give this impression that we're on top of things. We are your solution for dealing with catastrophe. What about everyone who isn't a member? What are they supposed to do? And when we had our earthquake, Deanna and I were looking after her parents, and it's almost as though the organization were falling over themselves to prove that they could look after them, even though they were already getting help. We saw something similar to this with I don't know what it was called now. What was that food package thing called in the United States? Live chat, help me out. There was the food parcels program for the coronavirus pandemic. And we covered on Watchtower in Focus, now JW Watch, Mark O'Donnell covered this in Mark O'Donnell Introduces the News segments. He covered how the organization effectively exploited this procedure that was implemented by the United States government as a means of redistributing surplus food. And the organization leapt on it as an opportunity to show that they were the ones behind all this. They were responsible for distributing this food when, in fact, they weren't. It was all to do with the government. So, and the way they were distributing the food as well, again, was very arbitrary and very directed towards the, there we are, Olaf says, wasn't it called Help from Farmers Program or something? Yeah, I have that in mind. Farm to Families, I think, says Stephanie. Yeah, they had this program in the United States. Maybe it's still running. And Jehovah's Witnesses were jumping on it as an opportunity to show their generosity and claim that this was from them somehow. And that wasn't the case. It was dishonest, really, frankly, the way they handled the whole thing. Again, Mark O'Donnell did some great pieces, some short pieces in Watchtower and Focus episodes at the time to cover this. But again, how is this anything extraordinary? Actually, let's take this opportunity, Producer Bob, to have a break. We're kind of halfway through now. And it would be nice to take one or two comments. I don't know whether there are any super chats. I think some might have disappeared already. There was a super chat from Dave Ram 777. Thank you so much, Dave Ram. There was Daniels Gray with $5. Thank you. And the Shunned Experience, which is a channel in its own right. Thank you so much for your super chat. Angie says, exploits the national disasters, but doesn't talk about the lives lost in it, because they're not Jehovah's Witnesses. I know, it's so infuriating, Angie. They're really only bothered. And it kind of makes sense, as I've said. If you think that these people deserve to die anyway in an impending Armageddon, why would you be bothered? Why would you be bothered about 3.7 million people dying from the coronavirus? The last days will continue to go on for generations to come. Wonder what they will be spewing out in 20 years, says Danny. I know, and I keep saying it, this stuff will age poorly, won't it? Because in the future, we won't just have, when we look back at what previous generations of the leadership have been saying, it's all in kind of, paragraphs, old Browning paragraphs from their magazines. Now we have gleaming HD videos that future generations of activists will be able to play, and indeed will play, on their videos to point back to the exploitative way that they dealt with the coronavirus pandemic. Lilia Benavides says, my neighbor, a JW, died of COVID. No JW came round. A priest, her other neighbor, was the one who looked out for her. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in many cases, I have to assume in many cases, Jehovah's Witnesses will be wanting to, respond to coronavirus cases and indeed coronavirus deaths. But there are always those you would think who slip through the net, and that seems to be one of them. And Paolo says, COVID hit more Jehovah's Witnesses because they are more old, I think. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't do the math. I didn't do the math, as David Splain likes to say, on what the percentage is. That might be interesting to drill down, I think, maybe for a future video. But you do tend to suspect, don't you, that it's going to be an older demographic on average. So they're going to be hit harder. SSF Heather, who I'm suspecting might be a Giants fan, says Red Cross helps everyone regardless of religious background. That was certainly what I saw firsthand in the wake of the Petrinia earthquake. If you haven't seen my Return to the Bunker video, you'll see it for yourselves, where we go to the collection centre. Lester Sumra says it's called the Department of Agriculture's USDA Farmers to Families food box program. Thank you so much, Lester. And who knows, maybe one day we'll do a video to just summarize what they did, how they capitalized on this program to make it look like they were the ones giving out the food, when really they were only kind of inserting themselves in a program that had been set up by the government. And Thomas says, in our area, a local was denied a food box when they saw them handing them out at the hall. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be the way these food boxes are handed out, depending on one's religion. So yes, I think that will do for now, but please do keep the comments coming in. And as I mentioned earlier, as the live stream comes to a close, I'm going to do a viewer invasion, and we're going to take one or two comments and questions directly on the live stream for those who are able to appear on camera. Producer Bob will be dropping a link at the appropriate time so that you're in with a chance of appearing on today's live stream. Let's go back to the GB update.
That's not the only thing that Paul talked about in Romans chapter 8 and verse 35.
He talked about persecution.
He also mentioned persecution. We certainly have had to face that. It hasn't gone away during the pandemic.
Who'd have thought?
As of May 2021, more than 155 brothers and sisters are in prison for their faith.
So yes, I tweeted about this as well at the time. Incidentally, if you're interested, my Twitter is at Cedars JW Survey. And I tweeted at the time, Mark Sanderson says, as of May 2021, more than 155 Jehovah's Witnesses are imprisoned for their faith. It's worth highlighting that this represents 0.0012% of the 2020 witness numbers, or 1 in 54,000, and yet Jehovah's Witnesses routinely claim exceptional persecution as Jehovah's organization. 1 in 54,000 Jehovah's Witnesses are incarcerated for their beliefs, and yet this is an organization that routinely claims that Jehovah's Witnesses are conspicuous in being on the receiving end of religious persecution or persecution of religious minorities. They never talk about other minorities. They never talk about victims from other religious groups. They spin this narrative that it's exclusively about Satan persecuting God's one and only true organization, which is grotesque if you think about some of the groups, the Uyghurs, for example, in China, who are just being treated grotesquely. And it's very disturbing, actually, when you look into the way other groups are being persecuted. But Mark Sanderson and the rest of the governing body need Jehovah's Witnesses to feel besieged, embattled, targeted by Satan's system of things. And so he's going to show now a segment with examples from Russia, or he's going to remind us, I suspect, that he went to Russia.
Even so, there have been positive developments. In recent months, we were so encouraged to learn that 32 of our brothers in Eritrea have been set free, including Paulos, Isaac, and Negede, who were imprisoned for 26 years. We continue to pray for the 20 brothers and sisters who are still in prison. On May 8, we were delighted to learn that the Turkmenistan government released from prison all 16 of our brothers who were imprisoned for conscientious objection to military service. We thank Jehovah for these positive developments.
What does it say about this whole narrative of Satan's system targeting Jehovah's Witnesses if you have these positive developments? You know, is it not arbitrary to point to those who are imprisoned or those who are mistreated and cherry pick those examples as proving that that Jehovah's Witnesses are being oppressed by Satan's system, to then kind of switch to saying, oh, well, in these instances where witnesses have been released, that's Jehovah's blessing. It can't be anything to do with the fact that it's not really Satan's system. And just as you're going to have abuses of justice, you're also going to have corrective measures taken. You're going to have witnesses being released. Governments are going to realize they were too heavy-handed. They're going to have a change of heart. But they can't be pragmatic about this. They have to pin this somehow on either oppression by Satan and Satan's system of things or Jehovah's blessing. And you then have the question, well, if Jehovah is blessing just these people here, or just whoever it is that happens to have been released, why isn't he also blessing similarly those who are still behind bars or those who are continuing to be mistreated and oppressed? You can't have it both ways. You know, you can't just do it in this incredibly arbitrary way where if it goes in your favor, it's Jehovah, and if it goes against you, it's Satan's system of things.
When I went to Russia for the
go.
Supreme Court hearings in 2017,
He can never miss an opportunity, it seems, to remind us of the fact that he went to Russia. I was there in person. I was on the ground. I rolled up my sleeves and I appeared in the court in Russia and it didn't go well. So then I left. And I left everyone to their doom. But I was there. I was showing solidarity. We know, Mark Sanderson, we know you were there in Russia because we're repeatedly shown pictures of you in the courtroom. You don't need to remind us of that. He can't miss an opportunity, can he?
It was a very sobering moment when we heard the judge announce
Stealing Tony Morris's
that
line.
our legal entities were banned. We knew Jehovah would look after our brothers, but there were so many unknowns. How would our brothers be affected? Some, of course, have been arrested, like Brother Dennis Christensen. He's been in prison for 4 years as of May 25, 2021. Although Dennis has qualified for parole for over a year, the authorities have hardened their hearts. They have not let him go. In spite of that, Dennis and his wife Irina are in good spirits.
So this guy fascinates me, Dennis Christensen. And first of all, let me leap at any opportunity to express solidarity with any Jehovah's Witness who is imprisoned or mistreated in any way, shape, or form simply for having a religious belief, set of religious beliefs. It's wrong. I would try and stop it in any way I could if it were in my power. You simply do not deal with abusive cults by making them feel more persecuted and by trying to police what's going on in their heads. This is, this has George Orwell written all over it, doesn't it? We cannot accept a world in which there are certain religious beliefs you're allowed to have and certain religious beliefs you're not allowed to have. We need to draw the line when there are abuse. I wish governments would be more proactive in doing that, quite frankly. But when it comes to just simply having beliefs, no, this is wrong. So that's the first thing I wanted to say and just repeat my stance on this. It's wrong what's happening in Russia. It's not the way you deal with cults. Dennis Christensen, though, I find him fascinating. We've learned that he's now been imprisoned for 4 years and he should have been put out on parole a year ago, but apparently the authorities have hardened their hearts, as Mark Sanderson put it. There's always got to be some theological spin on everything. 4 years is a long time to be deprived of your freedom and to have limited access to this constant flow of indoctrination. I don't doubt for a moment that he is still, as of now, a quote-unquote faithful, devout witness. I just would be fascinated if he ever woke up, because he has been, for want of a better word, the poster boy, really, of persecution in Russia. They've put him front center. They've made essentially him the face of persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. Imagine if he were to wake up one day. How would the organization react to that? Think of all the videos that they would need to edit him out of or remove from jw.org, and think how compelling his voice would be as someone featured so heavily in Jehovah's Witness propaganda. So it just fascinates me to think. I know it's all hypothetical. It fascinates me to think what would happen if he ever woke up.
And we continue to remember our 10 brothers who are in penal colonies in Russia, and the 48 who are in pre-trial detention as of May 14, 2021. Now that 4 years have passed since the ban, what do we see? Our brothers have not cowered. They have not backed down. They continue to serve Jehovah faithfully.
Well, why wouldn't that be the case, would be my question. Why wouldn't they continue to serve Jehovah? They are having... Putin is effectively constructing... or making real their entire theology, because their theology says we're going to be oppressed and persecuted by Satan's system of things, and then a thug like Vladimir Putin comes along and says, oh, I can help you with that. because this group pisses me off because I can't control it in the same way as I can control the Russian Orthodox Church and other mainstream groups. This group answers only to Mark Sanderson and his pals. They're not letting me in. They're not letting me control the group. So I'm going to persecute it for that reason, not because I'm Satan's puppet and we're on the cusp of the last days, or we're deep into the last days and on the cusp of Armageddon. Of course they're going to stay as Jehovah's Witnesses because their entire narrative is being played out before them. And when I was a Jehovah's Witness, we always used to say this, oh, isn't it fascinating how whenever there are brothers in a certain country who are persecuted, the work continues. And sometimes, sometimes the number of witnesses grows in that country. And now when you're on the outside, it makes total sense because you understand that there's a very strong persecution narrative. This organization, as I've repeatedly said, needs to be persecuted in order for the theology to make sense. So of course in countries like Russia, when they receive persecution, of course they're going to knuckle down and think, well, this just proves that we're on the brink of Armageddon.
As you watch this next video, see who the authorities are attacking now.
In 2013, our son Igor became ill, and he got worse and worse. Then in 2014, our son died. It was such a tragedy for us, and words cannot describe it. He was our only son and was deeply loved. Then, 2 years later, my mother died, and 2 years after that, my sister died. Getting through all of that was beyond human strength. We had just started to feel a little better when on March 26, 2019, armed men in masks burst into our home. It was such a shock. We went numb. We couldn't say anything. We were paralyzed.
On May 22nd, 2019, early in the morning at 5:45, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw people who showed me their identification. Then those people came into my apartment, made a search and took me to the Center for Fighting Extremism. It ended up with my being accused of participating in extremist activity. Then, in 2020, the court hearings began for my case.
So, one thing that kind of stands out for me, and we're going to see more of this, by the way, there's a bit of an elephant in the room here, which is that they're describing, being basically harassed by the Russian authorities for being Jehovah's Witnesses, which, again, I can only stress I utterly condemn. But they're telling these stories walking around freely, it seems, in Russia. I have to assume this is filmed in Russia. They're walking around freely, getting all of these B-roll shots, presumably with a Jehovah's Witness film crew. This stuff hasn't been filmed. This stuff isn't a selfie video. This stuff has been filmed by a film crew. So they're walking around in broad daylight as Jehovah's Witnesses, as apparently free Jehovah's Witnesses, in a country that is, we're being informed, is hell-bent on finishing them, on snuffing out the religion. But here they are walking around freely and apparently with a camera crew, with a film crew. Again, I have to assume this is filmed in Russia because we're not being told it's being filmed anywhere else. We're not being told they're in exile somewhere. And that for me is kind of a huge question mark hanging over the whole thing. If you're in a country where it's so unbearable to be a Jehovah's Witness, how are you walking around freely, telling your story with a Jehovah's Witness film crew? So that's kind of a bit weird. And we're going to learn that the reason why these particular people have been singled out is because essentially of their age. Mark Sanderson wants to point to the fact that Russian authorities are even rounding up and incarcerating or putting through trials people of this age group. And why wouldn't they? Why would older people be somehow exempt from a law, albeit an unjust law? How would old people be exempt from this? So yeah, just interesting that that they're trying to make this argument of Russia being hell-bent on rooting out any kind of manifestation of Jehovah's Witness worship, and yet you have these people walking around freely, it seems.
For example, for my criminal case, they collected 17 volumes of evidence against me, and they questioned over 200 witnesses. Then the court hearings started. First of all, there were Valentina's hearings, then mine. Of course, none of that is exactly pleasant, but it somehow made us stronger, and Jehovah supported us. We even went to the court feeling joyful. We felt that Jehovah was helping us, supporting us, strengthening us, and encouraging us. We are so grateful to him.
Our fellow worshippers constantly called on us from all parts of the town. They always supported us,
we
always
were
called us, and said strengthening things and quotes from the Bible.
I understood that it would end up with my being a defendant. It was as though inside I was already prepared for that. And you know, I didn't feel any kind of panic. I just wanted to get through it in a dignified manner and didn't want to let anyone down, and under no circumstances betray our God Jehovah. I want to say that each day for me is a blessing from Jehovah. I pray and ask for peace and calmness in both my heart and my home. And right now, the blessings far outweigh all negative experiences. This I value very highly. The sentence might even involve time in prison, or it might be a suspended sentence. But regardless of the outcome, we need to remain faithful to God and to stay on the way of truth to the end.
So the sentence might involve prison, or it might involve a suspended sentence. Well, which is it? I mean, they're showing us these stories, and they don't tell us what happens. For all we know, this is a suspended sentence, and they were let off. We're not given this crucial piece of information so that we can form a rounded conclusion about what's happened here. Again, you don't need to tell me that persecuting religious minorities is wrong, but how have they been persecuted? I want to know. You've introduced these people, and you're withholding information about what happens to them. The guy in the leather jacket, nice leather jacket, by the way, he speaks of the court hearings and says, well, they weren't exactly pleasant. So, as far as I can tell, they had police bust into their homes and accuse them of extremism, and they went through court hearings which weren't exactly pleasant. And now they're wandering around Russia, able to do so freely with JW film crews shooting B-roll in the park. You know, what am I missing here? Well, I'm sure that there are worse stories that the organization could be pointing to. But I think it's disingenuous, especially if you're trying to force home a narrative of a particular religious group being conspicuous in terms of the persecution they're facing. I think it's dishonest and disingenuous to do so in such a kind of shifty way, withholding key elements of the story.
No matter what happens, whether I remain free or they put me somewhere behind prison walls, there is absolutely nothing that can separate us from God's love. No prison walls can shut out God's love. It can penetrate everywhere, to all depths. It was the strength that we received from God that helped us to survive the death of our son and many other misfortunes. So we will get through this too. We definitely will. I have no doubt about it.
How shameful that the authorities are attacking our elderly brothers and sisters.
Yeah, that seems to be why these stories were chosen. Oh, they're elderly. How shameful that elderly people have been, well, he says attacked. They were arrested. They were arrested as extremists, accused of extremism, basically prosecuted by the authorities, and now they're wandering around in parks. So again, without more information, it's difficult to really fill in this case of them being quote unquote attacked or treated in anything approaching the brutality that groups like the Uyghurs are experiencing in other countries. But yeah, it just seems odd that Mark Sanderson should expect that Jehovah's Witnesses past a certain age will be overlooked when a religion is banned. I think that's an incredibly naive approach to take. Of course, if a religion is outlawed, the whole religion and all believers are outlawed, not just people of a certain demographic. I'm going to take one or two comments. I noticed there are some super chats here. Many thanks to the Aussie Outdoor Blokes. Thank you for your incredibly generous super chat. There it is. Good day, team. You outstanding people. And how are you, Lloyd? I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for asking. Not too bad at all. And we have some other super chats as well. Apologies if I've missed some of them, but let me read some of them off. Cody Downs with $25. Thank you so much, Cody. We've had Paper Moon. We've had Jeannie Jewel. Thank you, Julie V. Thank you, Toonie Evans with $10. Nice to see a fellow Evans pitching in to support this channel. And thank you, Nicholson Lawrence, Jeff Tucker, and we've just seen there the Aussie Outdoors Blokes. So really nice to see the channel being supported. Thank you very much indeed. And we have, let me see, maybe a couple of minutes left. We've come this far, viewers. We may as well see it to the bitter end.
And yet, isn't it amazing that despite their own trials, these dear older ones are not yielding to fear? They say that the persecution has only made them stronger in the faith. You, dear brothers and sisters in Russia, have done so well. You are an inspiration to all of us. We truly love you.
Mark Sanderson truly loves the brothers and sisters in Russia and wants to remind them that they're not going to quit. And again, how is this anything extraordinary? Of course they're going to stick at it, because the entire narrative of Satan's world being out to get God's one true people is being played out by Vladimir Putin.
Doesn't all of this convince us of what Paul said in Romans chapter 8 and verse 37? In all these things, we are coming off completely victorious through the one who loved us. That's what we've seen with our brothers and sisters facing the pandemic, natural disasters, and persecution. What conviction does this lead us to? Paul continues in verses 38 and 39. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor governments, nor things now here, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creation will be able to separate us from God's love that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Brothers and sisters, we are convinced that you too will continue to come off completely victorious
I may
no
have
matter
edited
what
that.
trials you face. Why? Because nothing can separate us from Jehovah's love. Please know that we love you all very much.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
From the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, this is JW Broadcasting.
Mark loves me very much. Well, that's lovely. I actually feel a bit guilty now for doing this rebuttal. If I'd known how much Mark Sanderson loved me, would I have done this? I don't know. I sense his love might be a little bit more conditional than that. I think it's more to do with those who accept his authority. And apologies for doctoring the video to include you two. I just couldn't resist that. But yeah, I mean, look, it's like I said at the beginning, they just don't miss an opportunity, do they, to reinforce their control. Everything is about, it's the last days, Armageddon is imminent, Satan's out to get us, we're being persecuted. Oh, look, Russia. Did I mention I visited Russia? Yes, you did, Mark. We've seen many, many photos. Oh, okay, anyway, I was in Russia, and it's terrible what's happening there. And here are some old people walking around in a park. How could old people be picked on like this? Oh, yeah, terrible. Yeah, old people should be exempt whenever there are laws passed. It's so weird and culty. And hopefully I've done justice in this live stream rebuttal. I just need to quickly thank Nathan Wilcox for your super chat. Thank you very much indeed, Nathan. What we're going to do now, I've been out 10 plus years, but my wife and I love your content. Thank you. What I'm going to try and do now, because I'm anxious to get your take on this. And so, as mentioned at the beginning, producer Bob is going to put a link in the live chat. We are having a viewer invasion. So I'm going to, one by one, invite some of you from the live chat into the live stream. I only ask that you only attempt to join the live stream if you're willing to show your camera, if you have your camera switched on for reasons I've already explained, and also please be sure to keep comments and questions respectful and on topic. If you're happy to abide by those rules, I'm happy to welcome you on. And straight away we have Jexit. How are you, Riley?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you so much for being the very first ever to invade my channel as a viewer. So
it's an honor.
I feel it is very invasive, but hopefully I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say about what we've just seen.
It's so cringy. It is so cringy. One thing that stood out to me was Mark Sanderson's use of the word unprecedented.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just use the word unprecedented in place of the phrase a lot. You know, it's a completely different meaning. Unprecedented compared to what?
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to make a statement like that, you need to back it up.
Yeah, if you're going to say we've seen more natural disasters in 2020 than we ever have, ever in the history of mankind or the history of the planet, we're going to need some evidence, because that's a pretty extraordinary claim. If that were true, that would be newspaper worthy, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
So yeah, definitely they do like their hyperbole, don't they? It's almost as though it's propaganda.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Never.
Wow. But no, that was a really good observation. Thank you. I can see a few more lining up. So I'm going to bid you adieu. But thank you for making an appearance, Riley. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers, pal. And we have Fritz. Hello, Fritz.
Hello. Good to meet you.
Fritz, you are on the Lloyd Evans channel, and I'm fascinated to know your thoughts on what we've just seen.
I'm just amazed with this idea of persecution and how they think that they're just above everyone else. I mean, in Canada right now, we've had all these religions that have gone against these COVID rules that are being actually put into prison and everything. and whatnot, and we haven't heard any word from the witnesses at all. So, I mean, just on that basis, are these other religions above them now? So, yeah, it just shows how flawed their logic is.
So just repeat that. So other religions have been going to jail for what reason?
Oh, they've been holding, continuing with their meetings and their churches open and things like that. And so in contravention of the government rules. And I mean, they're even using the same words that they're following God's rules and not men's. And they've been put into jail for it. So, I mean, just to use the JW's logic, you know, these ones are being more persecuted than any JW I've ever seen in my life, and definitely more than these Russians. So, I mean,
that's
it's pretty hard
that's
to
one way to look at
say
it.
that they're above them. That's for sure.
I guess that's one way to look at it. I think probably there are more compelling examples of persecution. You know, I mentioned the Uyghurs. There's the Rohingyas, aren't there? There's the Yazidis. There's so many groups. I mean, it's interesting when you do a Wikipedia for religious persecution, you'll see that, you know, there are religious groups that are far more likely. I mean, if you are a believer of one of these religions, you are far more likely to be persecuted for your faith than Jehovah's Witnesses, who are, as I mentioned, I mean, based off these figures that he's given us, 0.0012%, 1 in 54,000, that's your likelihood of being persecuted as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not impressed. I don't think that's conspicuous.
No, not at all. No.
So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Fritz. You raise a good point.
Thank you for broadcast today.
Oh, thank you, and thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, Fritz.
Right.
Cheers.
You too.
Oops, sorry, clipped him a bit there. That was Fritz. Let's get someone else on. Oh, Shaz Alive is upside down, or perhaps joining us from Australia. How are you, Shaz Alive?
I'm very sorry I'm upside down. I must have put my camera around the wrong way.
You're a little bit quiet. Could you speak to the microphone a little bit? Maybe.
Or is it this one?
I can just about make out what you're saying.
I'm having technical problems here.
No problem. Well, it's just lovely that you could join us. What did you think about the update video?
I think that the Jehovah's Witnesses are making a big deal out of basically nothing. They're having a bit of aggro from authorities that don't like them. That's going to happen no matter who you are.
Yeah, I mean, look, as I've said before, I think that what's happening in Russia is wrong, but certainly when it comes to the pandemic and disasters, they're spinning these things to be something that they're uniquely positioned to deal with, when that's manifestly not true. I mean, if you need to be a Jehovah's Witness to survive the pandemic, then how do we account for everyone who's survived so far? Yeah, it's silly, isn't it? But I'm glad that you seem entertained, and yeah, hopefully the gravity situation fixes itself at some point. You seem to be glued to the ceiling, but
My camera, it was meant to work perfectly, and it's cocked up. So sorry, but thank you for having me on the show.
my absolute pleasure. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks for joining. So that was Shaz Alive. We now are joined by Jordan Robertson. How are you, Jordan?
I'm good, Lloyd. How are you?
Very well indeed. You are, if I'm not mistaken, also known as the Shunned Experience.
I am, yeah. I am the Shunned Experience. In terms of the video, one thing I've always had an issue with is the obviously with the doomsday logic about, you know, earthquakes, and, you know, things like pandemics being on the increase. But if you look back through human history, it's just part of natural life. And I just find it incredibly frustrating that they keep using, using these little events to sort of scaremonger the believers in thinking they're so close to the end. But, You know, we had a pandemic 100 years ago with Spanish flu that wiped out millions. Earthquakes have happened for millions of years, way before human existence. And I just always fail to see why now we're so close to the end.
Indeed, yeah. I've commented before about you make a very good point there about the Spanish flu. I think that's estimated to have killed around 100 million. I think is the highest figure. We're currently on 3.7 million. So hopefully, I mean, fingers crossed. Hopefully, there's light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how many people will be killed by this pandemic. You would hope it won't reach those numbers, or it could be that coronavirus is in some way here to stay, and the best we can hope for is that it gets under control in the same way as the common cold, isn't killing numbers that there's millions of people. But even if the coronavirus, killed 100 million or more, that doesn't mean it's Armageddon. It's just an inevitable byproduct of pathogens. And by the way, who invented the pathogens?
Yeah.
Has Satan got a lab somewhere? Do we pin everything on Satan, or at some point does God need to take responsibility even for the life forms that kill humans?
Yeah. No, it's and then again with the relief work, it's just always helping out their own. They don't ever want to help out, like you mentioned about the Red Cross. They don't discriminate, but it's like they'll help you based upon your religious beliefs. But then in other publications and other videos, it's, we have the greatest example of unconditional love. God is not partial. So it's blatant hypocrisy there, which I find quite frustrating.
Amen to that. Yeah, it's. I suppose it's kind of validating to that I've done this rebuttal and will be doing more like this, because even if, let's say, a smaller percentage of Jehovah's Witnesses see these governing body updates, and I don't know that for sure, but let's say it's fewer, it's still manipulative propaganda, isn't it? And cherry picking of stories, and it needs to be answered. So I'm really glad that you tuned in and also gave your thoughts. That's fantastic.
No, thank you very much for having me on. Keep up the great work.
My pleasure. And check out the Shunned Experience, guys, where you'll see more of Jordan.
Thanks for the shout out. Cheers, Lloyd.
Thanks, Jordan. Cheers. And we also have Marianne. Welcome, Marianne.
Well, hey, Lloyd, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Can you hear me, Lloyd?
I can.
Great. I feel really bad for those people. I feel really bad for those people that they featured, being put on display like that and using their misfortunes to try to line their pocketbooks there at the board. But I'm glad you're bringing it to light. It just makes me just feel bad for them. And like you said, it'd be very interesting if any of them ever wake up.
Indeed, it's. We've just seen an older couple and an older lady walking around parks in Russia, and we've also seen was it a photo of Dennis Christensen, and all of this followed by, oh, by the way, donate.
Yeah.
Or that's certainly a message that's included in the video, and yeah, it does feel exploitative, doesn't it? If it's not exploitative from a money point of view, it's certainly exploitative from the point of view of, here's evidence that we're God's one and only true organization. You need to stay loyal. You need to either join us or stick with us. So, yeah, it's always been a case with this kind of persecution porn propaganda of capitalizing on people's fears and paranoias and making them feel as though Satan's out to get them. Definitely.
And they're definitely rehashing the same old thing about, unprecedented. I've heard that word. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So many times growing up in it, and they still got the same vocab.
It's an unprecedented number of uses of the word unprecedented, surely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's their final word that they always like to trot. Thank you, and have a great day. All right, guys.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. You take care.
Bye.
So that was Marianne. It's going well so far, the viewer invasion. I think I'm going to have to do this again. We have one or two more, and I would just ask, there's a couple in the green room who do not have cameras activated. So I'm going to bring on Joseph, and then I'll bring on the remaining. There's two more remaining so far, and then we'll start wrapping up. Welcome,
hello,
Joseph. I can hear you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm fascinated to hear what you thought about what we've just seen.
I thought it was interesting, and I don't condone the persecution of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. I don't know if you've noticed this, but over I'd say the recent years, especially the recent months, I've noticed that they've been pushing or being persecuted and stay in the truth. More of just stay in the truth as long.
Seems to have frozen, at least at my end. Could you just repeat that last part? I think we might have temporarily lost. Oh, you're back now. Could you just repeat that last part for us, Michael? Sorry, Joseph.
Yeah, I've noticed that over whenever I've attended it, like the memorial or whatever, I don't think they realized I was there. They've been saying that to stay in the truth as long as possible, and I've noticed they've been pushing that as a lot lately. So I think a lot of people are leaving.
Yeah, it's got to be high pressure, hasn't it? You know, the more paranoia there is, the more doomsday fear-mongering there is, the more pressure there's going to be on the rank and file, and you've got to think that's going to be exhausting, you know, week in, week out. Constantly being told, stay, yeah. Please, just stay. It's going to be exhausting after a while, surely. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, that, and they've been pushing the door-to-door ministries once they will come back in August in my area. That's what they've said.
August, yeah. I think I've heard something similar. I think I heard something about October for Kingdom Halls. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm mistaken. But yeah, they're going to want to, you know, get back to normal as soon as they can, or at least get back to normal for as long as there can be a normal. Because as I mentioned in a recent video, I think COVID's given them, you know, a vision of what they can do in the future if funds get desperate enough. But yeah, for as long as they can afford it, they're going to want things to go back to normal, I think.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. That's okay. Thank you for your insight, and thank you for tuning in, Joseph. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, take care, pal. And we have a couple more that we can hear from, including fellow JW Watch team member Kim Silvio, who was, I don't mind saying, viewers, rebuking me on an earlier Zoom call for holding this live stream at what for her is an antisocial time. And I think the proof that it's an antisocial time is the fact that it seems still quite dark there in Australia, although there is some light through the blinds. Kim, have you forgiven me for doing this live stream?
No, I will never forgive you, but it's been a very good live stream, and I'm very pleased that it's worked out as well as it has. I had to come on, not for any other reason. Nobody wants to see my bed hair or my pajamas. I had to come on because producer Bob's being very shy about their statistics on that you cast about earlier on in the live stream about the religions and the percentages and, you know, like the impacts.
Oh,
yes. So I had to come on and tell you that per 100,000 deaths, the Jewish religion was the most heavily hit, followed by Christianity, Hinduism, Sikhism, Muslims, Buddhism, and then other religions, which is where Jehovah's Witnesses fall into. So Jewish people lose 139 people per 100,000 in the pandemic, and other religions lost 38 per 100,000.
So it's low for Jehovah's Witnesses.
It's basically non-existent.
Oh, okay.
Like compared to other religions, and we're doing a per capita comparison. That the Jehovah's Witnesses are basically unaffected in comparison to Judaism, Sikhism, Muslim, and Hinduism.
How would we... Thank you for doing this number crunching, by the way. This is incredibly helpful. It's one of those things where I reach it in the thing, and ordinarily in one of my rebuttals, I would have had all the facts and figures lined up, but doing it in a live stream is slightly different. So I'm running into these issues now that I'm doing rebuttals in live stream format. So I appreciate you doing this. So could it even be said that Jehovah's Witnesses have had lower deaths, perhaps because of their responsible response to the pandemic, at least insofar as practicing social distancing and closing the kingdom halls, or would that be going too far?
No, I think that's a reasonable thing that you could assume, because obviously Jehovah's Witnesses responded to the pandemic very quickly, much to most of our surprises, I'm sure, where they did close the kingdom halls, they observed social distancing, they put into place alternative methods of worship through the Zoom meetings and whatnot. So I think it's reasonable. I don't know exactly in all of the countries in the world, but certainly in Australia, the mosques and the Sikh temples and whatnot, they were closed and opened and closed and opened, and I don't think that there was a uniformity that there was within the organisation of shutting it down worldwide. So in other countries, I can only assume it was either the same or worse, where they did keep, going open and closing. So I would think it's reasonable to say that is probably why they are less affected.
Interesting. Well, I'm delighted to hear it. I wish the organisation could have been less exploitative in terms of the fear-mongering and the efforts to leverage control. But again, as I've said from the beginning, I'm really genuinely pleased that they did take this position of practicing social distancing and closing the kingdom halls. I think it would have been far worse, could have been catastrophic, in fact, if, for example, they'd held the memorial in those early stages. So yeah, I'm really pleased. Yeah,
absolutely. I just wish that they were as responsive in other areas of their religion, but I think that they've done a great job, and credit where it's due.
Indeed. Thank you so much for jumping on there, and credit to producer Bob.
Yes, good job, producer Bob,
finding this information, even if I somehow missed the efforts to get it through. Kim Silvio was on hand, even though it is an unearthly hour down under in Australia. Thank you so much, Kim.
No worries. Talk to you later. Bye.
I think that's it, because the remaining potential viewer invasion participant has the camera off. So I think that might have to be it for the viewer invasion. But what an interesting viewer invasion it's been, and I very much look forward to doing this again in the future. It's great to have a bit more engagement from the viewers. Producer Bob, do we have any comments or any super chats or anything like that before we... I know there's one there from Nathan. Oh, Ashura says, I still believe someone needs to create a YouTube puppet show of the governing body behind closed doors. That would be fun. I would certainly watch that, Ashura. Many thanks to Nathan Wilcox. Been out 10 plus years, but my wife and I love your content. That's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm noticing as well another super chat. I think I might have missed it in terms of being able to summon it, but thanks to Nicole Mort Parker for your super chat too. Excellent live stream, Lloyd. Thank you for your hard work. This is very revealing and helpful. I'm sure it will help those watching who need to see the real truth. Great job. Thank you very much, Nicole. Nicole is also a patron of the show, of the channel, of my work. And maybe one or two more comments, producer Bob. Vinny says, strange how Watchtower will be watching but haven't joined in yet. You never know. They do tend to keep an eye on things, don't they? They have, as we've learned, is it the forensics team? Hello, forensics team. And there's Amanda celebrating the appearance by Kim Silvio. Christy says, it was so sobering. I think I'll need a pink gin to refresh myself. Yes, good plan. I intend to de-sober myself personally once this is over. I might have a pink gin myself. I think Christy is aware of the fact that pink gin is one of my drinks of choice. I like a pink gin. What can I say? And I think we'll leave it there. But many thanks indeed to producer Bob for your splendid work in the background. Viewers, I hope you've found this material interesting. Typical manipulative, coercive fare from the organisation that claims that it is God's one and only true channel on earth, the only way that you're going to survive an impending Armageddon. But what do we really expect? This is the sort of stuff that they excel in. They're always going to leap on calamity as a means of extending their control. But that's all we have for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to I think we had 900 plus at one point. Really hope you enjoyed the show. I look forward to doing more rebuttals to governing body updates in this way in the future, and we will have more viewer invasions, so look out for those. But that's all we have time for. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching.